You know, when we think of ancient Rome, images of grand emperors, magnificent architecture, and epic battles often come to mind. But beneath all that glory lay a brutal reality that is rarely told in full: the lives of Rome as slaves. What Rome did to its slaves was far darker and more horrifying than most people realize. Slavery was the backbone of the Roman Empire's power and wealth. Millions of people were captured, sold, and forced into a life of unimaginable hardship. These slaves were not just workers. Many were subjected to cruelty, dehumanization, and violence on a scale that's hard to comprehend today. From the public arenas where slaves fought to the brutal punishments meted out in private, the treatment of slaves reflected the harshness of Roman society itself. But why did Rome depend so heavily on slavery? What kinds of horrors did slaves endure daily? And how did this system shape the empire's history? In this story, we will uncover the shocking truths about Roman slavery. A story of oppression, survival, and the will to resist. Prepare yourself to see ancient Rome through a very different lens, one stained with suffering and struggle. The journey into slavery often began with war or conquest. Enemies captured on battlefields or innocent civilians from conquered lands were dragged from their homes and sold into the vast network of Roman slavery. Families were torn apart, identities erased, and futures shattered. Once sold, slaves faced harsh new realities. Many worked on vast plantations, in mines, or in the households of wealthy Romans. Conditions were brutal: long hours, little rest, and punishments for the slightest mistake. Some slaves were forced to fight as gladiators, their lives a constant gamble for survival before bloodthirsty crowds. The legal system treated slaves as property, not people. They had no rights, no protections, and their masters held absolute power over their lives. Punishments were savage. Whipping, branding, mutilation, and even death were common for perceived disobedience. Yet despite this horror, slaves formed communities, found ways to resist, and sometimes even earned or bought their freedom. Their stories of resilience are woven into the fabric of Roman history, often overlooked but never forgotten. One of the most horrifying aspects of Roman slavery was the use of public punishments and spectacles to enforce control. Masters and officials used fear and violence as tools, displaying cruelty as a warning to others. Whippings and tortures were common, often carried out in public spaces to maximize humiliation and terror. Escaping slaves faced horrific punishments like crucifixion, a slow and painful death meant for those who dared to defy. Gladiatorial combat was another terrifying fate for many slaves, forced to fight each other or wild beasts. These battles were both entertainment and a demonstration of Roman dominance. The crowd's cheers masked the deep suffering of those forced to kill or die. Punishments weren't only physical. Slaves could be branded with hot irons or have parts of their bodies removed as permanent marks of shame. The psychological torment of being treated as less than human was a constant shadow over their lives. The story of Roman slavery does not end with the fall of the Roman Empire. Its echoes have rippled through centuries, shaping the course of history and challenging humanity to confront its darkest impulses. The legacy of what Rome did to its slaves is a powerful reminder of both the depths of cruelty humans can inflict and the enduring spirit of resilience that refuses to be crushed. Slavery was woven deeply into the fabric of Roman society. It was not a marginal institution but the very foundation upon which the empire's economy and culture were built. The labor of millions of slaves fueled the agricultural estates, the mines, the construction of grand buildings, and even the households of Rome's elite. Without the backs of these enslaved people, the grandeur and might of ancient Rome as we know it would have been impossible. Yet this legacy is stained by unimaginable suffering. Slaves were stripped of their freedom, identity, and dignity. They were bought and sold as property with no legal rights or protections. Their lives were often marked by constant fear of brutal punishment, fear of being separated from loved ones, and fear of death. One of the most enduring lessons from the Roman system of slavery is the terrifying power wielded by those at the top. The master's absolute authority over their slaves was enforced through terror and violence. Punishments such as whipping, branding, mutilation, and crucifixion were not merely means of control. They were public statements of power meant to instill submission. But despite this, slaves did not disappear into silence. Far from it. They found ways to resist, to survive, and even to reclaim their humanity. Some slaves forged communities within the confines of their bondage, creating bonds of solidarity that helped sustain them through the harshest conditions. Stories of slave revolts, the most famous led by Spartacus, stand as powerful symbols of defiance and the unquenchable desire for freedom. Spartacus's rebellion, though ultimately crushed, shook the foundations of Rome and exposed the simmering tensions within the empire. It forced Roman leaders to confront the risks of their reliance on slavery and showed that enslaved people were not simply tools or property. They were human beings capable of challenging their oppressors. Over time, the nature of slavery evolved, but its basic cruelty remained a constant. Freed slaves sometimes rose to prominent positions in Roman society, serving as artisans, merchants, or even government officials. Yet their freedom was often fragile, and the scars of slavery ran deep. The fall of the Roman Empire did not end the practice of slavery, but it laid bare the brutal realities of a system that many civilizations would replicate in the centuries to come. The transatlantic slave trade, and other forms of slavery in modern history, bear disturbing parallels to what Rome practiced. This legacy forces us to recognize a painful truth, that slavery is not a relic of the distant past, but a recurring human tragedy. Reflecting on the horrors inflicted upon Roman slaves invites us to consider the universal values of freedom, dignity, and justice. It challenges us to honor the memory of those who suffered and to learn from history so that such atrocities are never repeated. In art, literature, and scholarship, the voices of Roman slaves and their stories have gradually emerged from the shadows. Archaeological discoveries, ancient writings, and modern research have begun to paint a fuller picture of their lives, not just as victims, but as survivors who shaped history in their own ways. The legacy of Roman slavery is also a reminder of the power dynamics that exist in societies today. It invites us to question systems of inequality and oppression, and to stand against injustice wherever it arises. The courage and resilience shown by those enslaved under Rome's harsh rule inspire movements for human rights across the globe. Finally, remembering Rome's slaves helps humanize a history often dominated by emperors and generals. It places at the center the countless individuals who lived and died behind the scenes, whose labor and sacrifice built empires, but whose stories were long ignored. As we close this chapter, we are left with a profound respect for the enduring spirit of those who endured unimaginable hardship. Their legacy is not only one of suffering but also one of strength and hope, a testament to the unbreakable human will to survive and to seek freedom against all odds. Thank you for joining this journey through the dark history of Roman slavery. To uncover more hidden truths about our past and the stories that history books often overlook, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more.